Şu an olması lazım.
YouTube channel?
Yep.
Onu deniyor şu an. Olmuş.
Bizim kanal
Bozma. Olmuş.
olmuş mu?
Açtı okuyucuları.
Olmuş mu?
Ben galiba.
Oh, I was. Hey, how are you?
Well, thank you for coming to this event.
Hello, merhaba and welcome. My name is Oktay Şekercisko. I'm Senior Director for Global Strategy, Educational Growth and International Partnerships. We are very happy to join our forces with a couple of groups from Binghamton, Turkey, and Greece to bring you special programming today. We will have 3 different programs, 3 different activities. And today is actually the first day of International Education Week. So as part of the International Education Week celebration, International Education and Global Initiatives Office provided this program. And then every year we are going to offer you similar programming with different cultures, different countries, and we are hoping that it will be kind of a tradition of Binghamton University starting International Education Week with these kind of activities. We have live broadcasts to our colleagues and friends in Turkey and in Greece. So I just want to say hello to our friends back in Turkey and Greece, and thank you so much for joining us for this special day that we are celebrating the importance of history and culture, how history and culture impact international relations. This is a great example of that the Greece and Turkey case, actually, is a great example of that. So today we are very lucky. We have a resident expert, Sibel Karakoc. She will talk about historical perspectives about Greece and Turkey population exchange. And then after this presentation, we have a little bit of gap, but we have to set up for special screening of a documentary and then music performance. So what happens is that at 5:30 p.m. we have Greek American documentary director Christos Valantis Stamelos. He traveled from Turkey to Binghamton yesterday, and at the same time we have musician who plays 15 different instruments. Is an international musician, Evrim Ateşler, and he traveled from Turkey to Binghamton as well. So at 5:30 p.m. we will have that special screening, and then we will have live music performance about the shared music between Turkey and Greece. Sibel will have historical perspective, but I want to, some of you will not be able to join us for the documentary. I just want to give a little bit of the information background about the documentary. After the population exchange, when Greeks and Turks exchanged countries in their new homeland, they overcame with lots of emotions, and they created the music genre called Smirneka. And so that music actually was played both in Turkey and Greece. You will hear lots of Turkish motifs and Greek motifs in that music genre. In 2016, the documentary director Christos Valantis had an idea to bring young Greek and Turkish musicians to come together and play our grandparents' songs. But in the process, they talk about their personal journey and their family's personal journey, part of the population exchange. So it's kind of, there's a reflection on their family history of how this population exchange impact them. And some of the musicians didn't want to be part of this project because the only things they heard from their grandparents about Turks or about Greeks were all negative things, and they didn't want to be part of this project. But during the process, it was healing for all involved, and at the end, there's a beautiful documentary. Christos Valantis is a graduate of Syracuse University. He's a Greek American, and his grandparents were subject to this population exchange. And in 2010, he wanted to find his roots, and he went to Turkey to research, and then he got married with a Turkish woman, and then moved to Turkey, and then now he lives in my hometown. I just found out, in the neighborhood that I grew up, right? So, and his wife teaching in a local high school, and he's teaching in Izmir American High School. He's teaching IB level cinema, and at the same time, he's involved with multiple documentaries. The first documentary he did was Hello Anatolia, and the second one is Journey Through Smyrna. So if you are here at 5:30, we would love to have you for that event, to join us for that event. After that, we have an after party. So if you want to join us for live Turkish and Greek music and Turkish and Greek food, we are meeting in Mandela Room at 8 p.m. 8 p.m. until midnight or until we drop dead. I don't know which one, right? So without further ado, I would like to invite Sibel Karakoc to talk and then share her research with us about Greece and Turkey population exchange.
welcome again, and thank you for inviting me for this event. My dissertation is not exactly on the exchange itself, but about the settlement process. In the second part of my presentation, I will talk about the specifics of my dissertation. I would like to start with a quote, with my favorite quote, "The past is prologue." What this means is that if you don't understand the history, you do not understand the context, and you cannot make sense of the present. Under today's geopolitical conditions, which constantly generates refugees, it is very important to understand the past. Especially today, even today, it's still talked about exchanging populations to resolve violent conflicts. It becomes more important to understand what happens when a population exchange is implemented. The Turkish Greco population exchange was not the first example of population transfers. There are many other exchanges in the history. However, this is undeniably the largest exchange, which involved 1.7 million people. About 1.2 million of them were Greeks and about 500,000 of them were Turks. Okay. As I said, I will divide my presentation into two parts. In the first section, I will give some general information about the exchange. In the second part, I will go into my dissertation research. Before continuing with the history of exchange, I want to share a personal history. As a granddaughter of population exchangees, I grew up listening many stories, some heartbreaking stories about the departure and some joyful stories from back home. My grandmother, she was in her early teenage years when she came. And unable to understand the reasons for departure, she grabbed a piece of dirt from the ground. She carried in a velvet pouch around her neck, and she used to tell us that this piece of dirt will call me back to my home. And when I go back there, I will put it back to its rightful place. She was never able to go back until she died at the age of 91 in early 2000s. And as a last duty, we just spread the dirt over her grave. I hope that gave her some peace. So I chose to start this way because I wanted to give a voice to the silent stories of thousands who were exchanged. Okay, going back to the population exchange. What caused to the exchange? What was the road to the exchange? Before I continue, I want to put up a map of the Ottoman Empire from 1817, which shows the lands controlled, and Greece is completely under the control of the Ottoman Empire in 1817. Ottoman population were ethnically, religiously, and linguistically diverse. They lived under the millet system, which was a way of managing differences among the many ethnic groups. Minorities under the millet system had a varying degree of autonomy in terms of the administration of justice and local affairs. When nationalism started to spread, religious affiliation was the first difference that became politicized. As we will see shortly, in the making of the Greek identity, Orthodox affiliation became a determinant part of their ethnic identity. Why were the Greeks living in the Ottoman Empire? Why were the Greeks living in the Ottoman Empire accommodated until the early 20th century, but targeted thereafter? What explains variation in the state policies to manage social diversity and attain order? Under the millet system, the Muslims and the non-Muslim minorities lived in a relative harmony. But what has changed? That they couldn't live together anymore. Most arguments by contemporary scholars to answer these questions focus on domestic dynamics, and they highlight the conflicts between the Greeks and the Turkish state. According to these views, territorial concentration of culturally different groups are to be excluded. Although these are solid theories, the impact of political and economic external involvement is also very important. So, what was the reflection of nationalism in practical life? The great power competition for spheres of influence showed itself in the Ottoman Empire, took the form of establishment of friendly, preferably Christian states. Russia was the first state to agitate the Slavic people in the Ottoman Empire. As a response to these pressures from abroad, the Ottoman Empire undertook the Tanzimat reforms and implemented reforms on the administration and established direct rule in the Balkans. The competition over Christian populations of Balkans intensified after the Russo War in 1878, and the great powers got directly involved in the solution of the Eastern question. Between the Berlin Conference in 1878 and the end of Balkan Wars in 1913, the Ottoman Empire lost all of its territories in the Balkans. So here is a map. There's a small minor mistake, but Greece is independent by 1913, and all territories in the Balkans are lost. And following the defeat in World War I, the Treaty of Sèvres left the Ottoman Empire in a little part in interior Anatolia. The Ottoman state was occupied by the Entente powers, including the Greek occupation in Smyrna. Refusing the Sèvres Treaty in 1920, the Turkish War of Independence started. Toward the end of the Greek army's 3-year occupation in Asia Minor, the region's Christian population fled as refugees to various ports around the city of Smyrna in Asia Minor. The Turks entered Smyrna in September 1922, and eyewitness accounts testify to the violence and horrors which rapidly followed, although not only from the Turkish side. Hundreds of thousands of refugees at Greek ports, destitute, starving, and desperate for assistance. Since the fighting had indirectly involved the great powers, and the peace treaty was rapidly signed by the British, and there was a call for a peace conference at Lausanne, which became the background of the population exchange in 1922. So, who was exchanged? We call this as the Greco-Turkish population exchange, but were the people really Greek or Turks? Did they identify themselves as Greeks or Turks? Let's look at the composition of the both countries. This information is from 1915 Greece. These are the ethnic groups living in Greece. There are Jews, Christians, and Muslims, and only actually 2 groups are speaking Greek. So it's an extremely diverse society. So when we look into the Turkish part, we see a similar picture. There are Smyrna Greeks from the western part of Turkey, Karamanlı Greeks from the interior Anatolia, Cappadocian Greeks again from interior Anatolia, Celtic Greeks from the northern parts of Turkey, and the Catholic Greeks mostly concentrated in Syria and Lebanon. So, the population exhibited in both countries multiple and complex identities that illustrated the emerging nation states. Language, for example, was not a defining feature. Many Greeks in Asia Minor spoke Turkish, but wrote in Greek script. Some of them spoke Greek, but they wrote it in Arabic script. So language was not a defining feature to divide people. Even religion was not even religion, which clearly divided the population into Muslim and Christians, was less divisive than might be imagined. And during the Lausanne conference, neither both delegations from Greek part or Turkish part were clear in identifying who was Greek or Turk, nor all exchanges identified themselves with ethnic identities. Identities were fluid and interchangeable, and it depended also their class. In this ethnically, religiously, and linguistically diverse geography, debates concerning the criteria of exchange between the Turkish and Greek delegations continued for weeks. The Greek delegation insisted that only the Greeks who were Orthodox should be exchanged, which was opposed by the Turkish delegation, which claimed that no, all Greeks should be part of the population exchange. After long discussions, the Convention concerning the exchange of population defined in its first article the persons that were subject to compulsory exchange were as follows. Turkish nationals of Greek Orthodox religion established in Turkish territory, Greek nationals of the Muslim religion established in Greece. Who was excluded from the exchange? So, since the convention agreed to take only the Orthodox Greeks, Greeks of Protestant and Catholic religion were excluded. Muslims of Albanian origin in Greece were excluded. Turkish-speaking Christians were excluded. Greeks in Istanbul settled before 1912 were excluded. And Muslims of Eastern Thrace were excluded. And also exchangeable women who married to non-exchangeable men. And when it comes to minors from divorced parents or orphans, it depended on the condition of the father. If the father was an exchangeable, the children would go. If the father was a non-exchangeable, the children would stay. So, now, I want to go into my research a little bit. The population exchange in history, actually by many disciplines, has been studied from international relations to anthropology and to history. And each discipline brought its own enriching approaches to the exchange. All of the debates over the population exchange can be separated into two categories, actually. The first set of debates are concerned with the exchange process itself and considered as part of diplomatic relations between two states. These debates highlight these debates see the exchange as an example of peaceful conflict resolution. And another set of studies see this as an internationally administered ethnic cleansing. The second set of debates focus on the settlement periods and treat the exchange as a process of purification in terms of the composition of their respective populations. These debates see the settlement of exchanges part of the nation-building process through a lens of demographic engineering and identity politics. In a broad sense, the argument contends that it was the Turkish ruling elites' aim to craft a religiously and linguistically homogeneous population that would defy any security concerns as opposed to the earlier multi-ethnic religious differences. Although nation building was the driving force of the time, nation building is an overarching phenomenon which has many sub-aspects. The mere focus on social engineering leaves a wide array of aspects out, such as the economic aspects is under study. My research builds on the nation-building process approach. However, I seek to understand the correlation between refugee settlement policies and the demands of the world market at the time. So I pursue the economic aspect of nation-building. In this context, I argue that the incoming refugees to Turkey were settled in a way to fix the devastated economy and continue uninterrupted exports of highly demanded agricultural products. Specifically, I'm looking into tobacco, fruits, and opium. Under these demographic and economic settlement policies of the new state in Turkey were rooted in the outcomes of the demographic and territorial conditions emerged with the start of Balkan Wars in 1912 and at the end of War of Independence in 1922. This decade, the 10 years between 1912 and 1922, witnessed a series of wars, ethnic cleansing, genocidal activities, which in result, the Ottoman Empire was flooded with refugees from the lost territories and lost most of its non-Muslim populations, specifically the Armenians and Greeks. So the Armenians and Greeks here is a table that shows the 1906, 1940, compares the 1906, 1914, and 1923 population losses. And it only considers the 1923 Lausanne borders. And as you can see, while the Armenian and Greek populations were very high in 1906, in 1914, and in 1923, they were down to a level less than 1/10. So what kind of hole this population loss created in the economy? The Armenians and Greek populations were dominated the trades, especially international trading. Records of exporters especially I found in the National Archives show that there was not a single Muslim exporter in the Ottoman lands and in Turkey. All of them were completely either Greek, Armenian, or Jews. Their absence, along with the decrease in population, left a big hole in the economy. In 1923, the extent of destruction was enormous. Not only the population was decreased, but also many parts of Asia Minor were destroyed as the stages of war. Housing was either damaged or destroyed, farmlands were burned, most businesses were non-functional. Under these conditions, the remaining Greeks, about 1.2 million in interior Anatolia, and Black Sea region would be the final three parties with the population exchange. The compensation was the 460,000 Muslims from Greece, whose 3/4 were foreigners. Under these demographic and economic conditions, the Turkish state called for the first economic congress at Izmir in 1923. The Congress started with Mustafa Kemal's speech, in which he stressed that the complete independence could be achieved once Turkey could achieve economic independence. While he was signaling the end of economic privileges to other countries, he was also inviting foreign capital to invest in Turkey as long as they followed the neo-economic vision of the state. One of these sessions in the Congress was a discussion on the future of agriculture. In a country whose 95% of exports consisted of agriculture and animal products, this type of settlement, the settlement of refugees was important from the farmer's background. The article said that the already present refugees and the ones to be coming need to be settled based on their previous economic activities. The climate and types of cultivation in the departing cities need to match of those in Turkey. So there was a clear economic intention in settling the refugees. The planning of the settlement was given to the General Directorate of Tribes and Refugee Settlement, which was established after the Balkan Wars in 1914. This directorate started the planning, prepared tables that divided, prior to the exchange itself, prepared tables that divided the incoming refugees to their agricultural activities. Okay. Here is an example. I think it's a little small, but the incoming refugees were divided as tobacco cultivators, grape cultivators, and olive cultivators. And they were settled in cities which exactly those were cultivated. Okay, the directorate was in operation until October 1923, when the Turkish state formed a ministry to manage settlement process. The settlement was set to start in May 1923, but preparations for transportation and settlement was not finalized, and it was postponed to December 1923. In December, only a small number of refugees were exchanged. Those were the ones who lost their houses, their properties, and they were accumulated in parts of Black Sea region. So around 8,000 of them were exchanged in December, but due to the winter conditions, the weather conditions were too cold, the exchange was postponed again to May 1924. So before the actual transportation of refugees started, the government formed the Ministry of the Population Exchange. The ministry increased the settlement regions for the refugees. Initially, the directorate assigned 8 regions to be settled, but the ministry increased those 8 regions to 10 and included some eastern and southeastern Anatolian cities, which were heavily Kurdish populated. The transportation of refugees and settlements started in May 1924 with the priority of tobacco cultivators. So they wouldn't miss the season for tobacco. Tobacco exports, as I said, the agricultural products were the 95% of the total exports, and only tobacco itself was 40% of all exports. And the continuation of tobacco exports was one of the few, ways to get the finances needed by the new state. As I mentioned briefly earlier, the housing was limited. There were problems on the road to settlement. Many houses were destroyed, and some houses were occupied by the locals, the livable ones. So the ministry decided to set up rural dwellings to accommodate those refugees. As a result of the settlement, I just want to show you how the cultivation of the high monetary exports increased. In 1923, as you see, they are low. In 1924, after the refugees came, each agricultural product increased. In 1927, it went down due to weather conditions of that year. So, as the biggest buyers of tobacco, the American consulates kept very detailed reports about the tobacco cultivation in Turkey. And actually, while I was working in the National Archives, I found a document that says that after the settlement of refugees, the cultivation increased, and they were expressing their, happiness with this. So, all right. I wanted to show you a few examples of Turkish tobacco sold in the United States. This was one of the first cigarettes, Fatima. Another one, early 1900s. And then here is another one. So my dissertation is still an ongoing research, so I will not conclude here, but I can give further detail in the questions. Thank you.
So actually, one of the families engaged in tobacco business. You saw the tobacco, although we are a tobacco campus, but we can talk about tobacco, right? One of the families, their last name is Mısırlı, and some of you might know that it's a very upbeat music, classical music called Mısırlı, and their residence is still in Smyrna, in Bucca, Smyrna, and they were actually American family. They had roots in America. They had the roots in Greece, and then through the population exchange, they left to Turkey and they moved to the U.S. and they still live in New York. And when I was looking at the historical photos to look at the population exchange, I noticed that before the population exchange, they had relatives in the U.S. and the relatives would come to Smyrna, Turkey, and then they would celebrate 4th of July in Turkey. So they did have these beautiful photos, historical photos for control. I just wanted to piggyback on what Sibel said. So if you have any questions to Sibel, so please, floor is yours. Yes.
You did say that there were people that were like the Turkish government or they would select people, you said?
Yes.
Was it
During the convention, some were excluded from the exchange and some were included.
the people that were excluded, did they leave as well? Or did they feel like not as part of the
Let me say, the people who were excluded actually were Catholic or Protestant Greeks, which was only a small minority inside the Lausanne borders of Turkey. Most of them lived in Iraq and Lebanon and or Syria, which were already lost territories, so they remained under other countries. So I don't know what's about their fate, what happens. But there was a small minority in Turkey, especially in Istanbul, they remained, and there are still some of them living in Turkey.
I'd like to ask you questions about your research. When you said that the expulsion of Armenians and Greeks led to a hole in the economy, what research, what information, what data are you looking at to make that conclusion? And I ask it within the context of war.
Mhm.
The Ottoman Empire is shrinking dramatically in a very short period of time, and there's chaos increasing on every front.
Yeah.
How does your research lead you to believe that the whole is from the Armenians and the Greeks when the economy is coming apart completely?
No, it's, I guess I didn't state it correctly.
Yeah.
So it's not the only reason. There is a population decrease. For instance, in 1923, there is no census, but the population went down, it's estimated went down to 8 to 10 million. I mean, there are war deaths, the farmlands were burned, destroyed, and the non-Muslim populations are gone. It's a combination of reasons that caused this war. But what I mean is, with Armenian and Greek populations, 80% of them were urban populations. And they led the trading and especially the exports. When I look into tobacco, opium, and various export records, there is not a single Muslim who dealt with international exporting. Each one of them, and I have the records from 1923 to 30s, all of them were from non-Muslim minorities. So their absence, yes, it caused a big hole, but it's not the only reason.
And then who or what fills the hole after they're gone?
Actually, interestingly, even though they were gone, their domination in international trading continued. I mean, I checked the records until 1930s, 7 years after the Republic was established. Still, each one of them were either Armenian, Greek, or from the Jewish societies, communities. So the remaining ones took over, most probably, and continued the trading. But as I said, this is still an ongoing research, so I'm still looking. Yes.
What role did these populations, if you want to say the Ottoman and Turkish Greek, and the Ottoman or Turkish Armenian, what role do they play in actual cultivation of tobacco and opium? So that when they're gone, also, what kind of hold does that leave in just the cultivation process? Because you talked about in your presentation about the need to replace the cultivator. So obviously they've also played not just a role in international trade, but also in cultivation as well. Can you
Yes,
speak to that to some extent, please?
absolutely. Especially the tobacco cultivation was done in the northern parts in the Black Sea region of Turkey. And it was the settlement of the Pontic Greeks. And almost, there were some, but the majority of the cultivation was made by the Greeks in the Black Sea region. And with their absence, it went down. And the same case with the opium. Armenians led the opium cultivation and trade, and their absence caused problems that needed to be, filled up with the incoming populations.
My knowledge in not historical context, but for Jim's comment, it was interesting. 2 days ago, Turkish newspapers listed the richest top 100 Turkish families, so it's a pop culture, not a historical. But it was interesting to see in that top 100, there were 9 families with last names, recognizable last names, that they are coming from the minorities. It was interesting to see that top 100. So about 91 families in the top 100 richest families of Turkey. Currently in 2017, 9 of them were from minorities. I don't know whether there's anything, but it's just. Any questions? Yes.
Could you talk a little bit more about if you have that information about the negotiations in the Lausanne Treaty, where they were arguing over what is a Greek and what is a Turk at that point in time? And how, you mentioned it, it's so chaotic, but how did they come to that? Do you know much about how they came to that agreement at that point in time? And then the problems with implementing?
Actually, during the negotiations, as I said, this is rooted in the millet system. The millet system divided the communities based on their religions. And when nationalism started spreading, religious difference became one of the differences that became politicized, especially for the Greeks. Greek communities, Greek-speaking people who were part of the Orthodox, church, patriarchy. It became an identifier of their ethnic group that wanted to be created at that time. So the delegations, the states were not clear. People didn't identify themselves with ethnic identities. I know from my personal history, my grandmother never said we were Turks. She always used to say we were Muslims, Macedonian-speaking Muslims, but never accepted an ethnic identity. So, and during the official, this chaos is reflected in the official negotiations also. Especially the Greek delegation wanted to take only the Orthodox because they used to, except one group, they spoke Greek language. They were from the same, religious affiliation, which connected them further. But on the Turkish side, only actually 1/10 of the population spoke Turkish, and only 1/10 identified themselves maybe the Turkish language and religion. So for Turkey it was a different case. So.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm wondering, what was the situation, you kind of touched on it, of the Jewish population in this exchange? Because from what you said, they were economically important. So what specific measures were taken there?
Actually, my focus point is not on the Jewish communities. They were highly populated in Saloniki, as you know, from the expulsion from Spain. And since I'm focusing only on the settlement in Turkey, like I didn't really focus on the Jewish populations. I'm sorry.
We just thought was the Jewish populations, they weren't subject to this
No, they weren't.
Greek-Turkish exchange
No,
at a large, okay.
There was only about 50,000 converted Jews, the Germans that came along the population exchange.
You mentioned that Istanbul's Greek were excluded from the exchange. First of all, what was the reason, and if they were they all allowed to stay in Istanbul, and if they stayed in Istanbul, did they were allowed to keep their properties and businesses?
The ones who were established in Istanbul before 1912 were all allowed to stay, and the ones established later had to be, part of the exchange. And yes, they were allowed to keep their businesses and properties. And actually, this is the reason the domination in international trading continued with non-Muslims, because the center of the ports and the center of international trading was Istanbul.
So actually, one of the musicians came today, talked about the stigma that we are talking about the economic impact, but the human impact as well is that there was stigma for the people who moved from Greece to Turkey or from Turkey to Greece. So they were never accepted, actually. They were always treated differently than local Greek citizens, or they were treated different than other Turkish citizens. So some of you know my family was subjected to this Greek Turkish population exchange as well. So my one of the interesting stories that my mother's side come from Bosnia, and they were immigrated from Sarajevo, Sarajevo to Turkey, and then my father's side came from Greece to Turkey. Imagine both of them are immigrants, right? But even between immigrants, there was a stigma that when my mother's first husband went to my Bosniak grandfather and said, I want to marry your daughter, and this was in 1940s. And then my grandfather said, what is your ethnic origin? And he said, we immigrated from Thessaloniki, Greece. We are Turks, but we immigrated from Thessaloniki. And my grandfather said, sorry, I don't have a daughter for people from Thessaloniki. So that stigma. And then my mom said, okay, I will jump over the wall and I will elope with you. She did. Her husband died a year later, very young age, and my mom had to come back. And then my mom fell in love with my father, and then my father's family came to my dede, the grandfather, and said, you want to marry your daughter? And then my grandfather said, where are you from? What is your ethnic origin? And they said, we are Turks, but we are from Thessaloniki, Greece. And then my grandfather said, I'm sorry, I don't have daughters for people from Thessaloniki. And my mom said, I'm used to this, come tonight. So I just wanted to share that with you. And thank you so much for Sibel. Thank you so much for joining us. And at 5:30, we will have live music and then the documentary. And the of artists will have a story to tell about the music and